The briefing room smelled like fear, and I had been in enough classified meetings to know the difference between routine anxiety and genuine terror. Every officer seated around the curved table carried the second kind on their face. I watched Admiral Colvane set down a data tablet with trembling hands, and that alone told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. Admirals in the Ritharan Empire did not tremble. They commanded fleets that burned across star systems. They crushed rebellions and swallowed worlds whole. They did not sit in sealed rooms with pale skin and shaking fingers. "Analyst Vorath," he said, and even his voice had a crack running through it. "What I am about to tell you is classified at the highest level our government recognizes. 41 hours ago, the 4th Expeditionary Armada ceased to exist." I let the sentence sit in the air. I needed to hear it again to be sure I had not misunderstood. "Ceased to exist," I repeated. 1,200 warships, 9 million crew. Gone. He pulled up a holographic display above the center of the table. A standard star map appeared, and at its center, a small blue planet orbited a yellow sun. Earth, humanity's abandoned homeworld. Their last confirmed position was high orbit above the 3rd planet in the Sol system. Telemetry, communications, tracking beacons, everything terminated at the same instant. Not sequentially, not ship by ship, all of them at the exact same moment. The officer beside him, a naval intelligence commander named Soren Halwick, leaned forward. No distress signals were received. No emergency beacons activated. No escape pods launched. We have scanned every frequency, every subspace band, every quantum relay channel in the region. There is nothing. I opened my own tablet and began taking notes, forcing my mind into the clinical space where emotion could not reach. What was the Armada's mission profile? Standard territorial acquisition. Admiral Colvane said, "Earth has been unoccupied for approximately 400 standard years. Humanity left during their great expansion. Our strategic command assessed it as an undefended world, ideal for a forward staging base in that sector. The 4th Armada was dispatched to claim it, establish orbital superiority, and begin surface installation." And the approach posture? Full combat readiness. Weapons charged, shields raised, conquest declarations broadcasting on all standard frequencies. Protocol 7, the standard procedure for claiming an undefended planet. I stopped writing. You sent 1,200 warships in full combat posture to take an empty planet? Commander Halwick shifted in his seat. It was considered a show of strength for the region. Other species have expressed interest in the Sol system. The Armada's presence was meant to discourage competing claims. I looked at the holographic map, at that small blue world hanging in projected light, and I felt the first cold finger of unease trace down my spine. "Show me the final transmission." Halwick touched his tablet, and audio filled the room. The voice belonged to Admiral Torvane, the 4th Armada's commanding officer. I had met him once at a fleet review, confident, sharp, a career officer with 30 years of deep space command. His voice came through mid-sentence, calm and almost bored. Preliminary scans confirm no orbital infrastructure, no active power signatures of military concern. Surface reads as overgrown but intact. There is nothing here. It is just a dead whirl. The audio cut to silence. Not static, not interference. Pure, absolute silence, as though the universe itself had swallowed the signal whole. "That is the last fragment," Halwick said quietly. "Captured by a long-range relay station 3 systems away. The timestamp places it 11 seconds before total signal loss across the entire fleet." I replayed it in my mind. Torvane's voice had been relaxed. He had seen nothing alarming on his instruments. Whatever had happened to 1,200 warships had happened so fast that the commanding admiral had not even finished his sentence. Admiral Colvane straightened in his chair and fixed his eyes on me. "You are the Empire's finest forensic analyst, Vorath. You have investigated fleet disasters, ambushes, and anomalies that no one else could explain. I am assigning you to determine what happened to the 4th Armada. You will be given a stealth corvette, a small crew, and orders to approach the Sol system under full concealment. You will observe, analyze, and report." "Rules of engagement?" I asked. "You are not to cross into the planet's orbital space. The threshold is defined as the exact altitude where the Armada's signals terminated. You stay outside it. You watch. You tell us what happened. Nothing more. I accepted the assignment because refusing was not an option, but also because I needed to know. 1,200 warships do not simply vanish. Physics does not permit it. Something had destroyed the most powerful expeditionary force the Empire had ever assembled, and it had done so in less time than it takes to draw a breath. My ship was the Quiet Blade, a Vexar-class stealth corvette designed for deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines. Small, fast, and virtually invisible to conventional sensors. My crew was minimal by design. Dren Cavallo, my co-analyst and closest professional colleague, had worked with me on 9 previous investigations. He was methodical, cautious, and had an almost supernatural ability to find patterns in corrupted data. Lieutenant Nora Kessar served as our tactical officer and pilot, a decorated veteran who had volunteered for the mission despite knowing that our destination had just consumed an entire armada. When I asked her why she volunteered, she looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Because someone has to go, and I would rather it be someone who knows when to run." During the transit to the Sol system, I immersed myself in every intelligence file the Empire had compiled on humanity. The species was a contradiction wrapped in a puzzle. They had emerged from a single world, fought devastating wars against each other for millennia, nearly rendered themselves extinct at least twice, and then suddenly exploded outward into the galaxy with a ferocity that caught every established civilization off guard. In the span of just a few centuries, they had colonized hundreds of worlds, built trade networks spanning multiple galactic arms, and developed technology that consistently surprised and occasionally alarmed their neighbors. But they had never unified. That was the detail our strategists had fixated on. Humanity had no central government, no emperor, no supreme military command. They were dozens of nations, hundreds of factions, thousands of independent colonies, all loosely connected by culture and commerce, but never by a single chain of command. The Empire's analysts had concluded that this made them vulnerable. A species that could not act as one, could not defend as one. I was not so sure. One detail in the historical files caught my attention and refused to let go. When humanity had departed Earth during the Great Expansion, they had not stripped the planet. Every other species I had studied, when abandoning a homeworld, dismantled everything of value. They took the metals, the technology, the energy infrastructure. They left behind bare rock and empty foundations. The humans had done the opposite. Their cities stood intact. Their power grids remained connected. Their subsurface installations, some reaching kilometers beneath the surface, were sealed and maintained by automated systems. The official explanation in our files was that humans were sentimental about their origin world and wished to preserve it as a monument. I stared at that explanation for a long time, and it did not satisfy me. Dren found me in the analysis bay 6 hours before our arrival, surrounded by holographic projections of Earth's surface topology. "You have not slept," he said. "Something is wrong with our assumptions about that planet," I told him. "We classified it as abandoned and undefended. The Fourth Armada's mission was built on that classification. But Dren, if you were leaving behind a world that you loved enough to preserve intact, a world that contained your entire species' history, would you truly leave it without protection?" He considered this. "Sentiment is not strategy. They left no orbital stations, no defense platforms, no military garrison. Our long-range surveys confirmed it. Our long-range surveys confirmed what was visible," I corrected him. "There is a difference between seeing nothing and nothing being there." He did not argue. Dren had worked with me long enough to trust my instincts, even when the data did not yet support them. The Quiet Blade dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the extreme edge of the Sol system, far beyond the orbit of the outermost planet, in a region of cold darkness where sunlight was barely a bright point among millions of stars. Nora brought us to a dead stop and killed every active system except life support and passive sensors. We drifted in silence, a tiny metal splinter in the vast emptiness, and we listened. The passive sensor sweep took 2 full hours to complete at this range. When the results compiled on my screen, I felt the cold unease in my spine crystallize into something much worse. There was no debris field around Earth. No radiation signatures consistent with weapons fire. No expanding gas clouds from ruptured reactors. No frozen bodies tumbling through vacuum. No emergency beacons, no distress buoys. No black box transmissions. The space around humanity's homeworld was pristine, quiet, and completely empty. 1,200 warships carrying 9 million souls had occupied that space less than 2 days ago, and now there was not a single molecule of evidence that they had ever existed. I stared at the sensor display and felt the silence of the Sol system press against the hull of our tiny ship, like a physical weight. Whatever had happened here had been total, instantaneous, and impossibly clean, and we were about to fly closer to it. Nora looked back at me from the pilot station, her face lit by the pale glow of her instrument panels. "Orders, sir." I took a slow breath. "Take us in. Minimum power. Passive sensors only. And Nora, if anything, and I mean anything at all, registers on those instruments that you cannot immediately explain, you turn this ship around and run. Do not wait for my order. Do not ask for confirmation. You run." She nodded once, and the quiet blade began its long, silent crawl toward Earth. I could not shake the feeling that the planet already knew we were here. The outer system was quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than natural. Dead worlds orbited in their ancient paths, ice and rock and swirling gas, all perfectly ordinary, all exactly where our star charts said they should be. But as we crept inward, past the massive gas giant that dominated the system's middle reaches, Dren sat up straight at his station and pressed his headset tighter against his ears. "Vorath, I am picking up something." I moved to his station. His screen showed a waveform pattern, rhythmic and precise, repeating at exact intervals. Source: Earth's moon. The signal is faint, extremely low frequency, cycling once every 11 seconds. It is not a communication signal. There is no data encoded in it that I can detect. It is just a pulse, a single, repeating energy pulse. Natural phenomenon? No. The regularity is too precise. Natural sources have variation, drift, entropy. This is mechanically perfect. Something on that moon is generating this pulse with a tolerance measured in nanoseconds. I recorded the signal and flagged it, then told Nora to continue our approach. We had come to find answers, and this was the first thread worth pulling. Over the next several hours, as the quiet blade drifted deeper into the Sol system on minimal power, I began reconstructing the Fourth Armada's final approach. Using the navigational data from their mission brief and the last telemetry burst captured by our relay stations, I built a three-dimensional model of how 1,200 warships had entered this system and what they had done in their final minutes. The picture was exactly what I expected from a standard Protocol 7 acquisition. The fleet had arrived at the system's edge in standard Imperial formation, a layered hemisphere of capital ships at the center, cruisers and destroyers in screening positions, frigates and scouts fanning out in a wide sensor net. They had advanced on a direct vector toward Earth at 3/4 fleet speed, weapons hot, shields at full combat rating, broadcasting their conquest declarations on every known frequency. It was textbook. It was how the Empire had claimed 100 worlds without resistance. But as I studied the formation data, a new set of readings on Dren's station began demanding my attention. He had expanded his search beyond the lunar pulse and was now mapping electromagnetic emissions from Earth's surface. "This does not match our intelligence files," he said, and his voice had dropped to the tone he used when data frightened him. The Empire's surveys recorded residual power signatures consistent with mothballed civilian infrastructure. Background-level emissions. What I am reading now is orders of magnitude higher. I looked at his numbers and felt my stomach drop. The energy output he was measuring from beneath Earth's surface was enormous. Not the faint hum of dormant power plants and sealed reactors. This was active, sustained, massive energy generation on a scale that rivaled the output of a small star. Something under the surface of that quiet, overgrown planet was very much alive and operating at full capacity. "Can you localize the sources?" I asked. Dren worked his instruments for several minutes, refining the data, filtering background noise, and isolating individual emission points. When he projected the results onto a holographic globe of Earth, I stopped breathing. Thousands of points of light covered the planet's surface. They were everywhere, spread across every continent, beneath oceans, under mountain ranges. embedded in the foundations of silent cities, and every single one of them was pulsing in perfect synchronization with the signal from the moon. 11 seconds. Pulse. 11 seconds. Pulse. Thousands of sources, all beating together like the chambers of a single vast heart. It is a network, Dren whispered. A planetary-scale network, and it is fully active. I sat down slowly. Our intelligence had told us Earth was an empty monument, a dead world preserved by sentimental humans who lacked the strategic discipline to strip it for resources. Instead, we were looking at a planet wired with thousands of synchronized energy nodes connected to a relay on its own moon, generating more power than most civilizations produced across all their worlds combined. What about the space around Earth? I asked Nora. Any anomalies in the gravitational readings? She ran the calculations and frowned. Yes, actually, there are faint gravitational distortions in the orbital zone that do not correspond to the planet's mass. They are subtle, barely within our detection threshold, but they are there. Something is producing localized gravitational effects in a shell around the planet. Dren and I exchanged a look. Gravitational manipulation required technology so advanced that only 2 species in known space had ever demonstrated it, and neither had achieved it on this scale. I turned my attention to the space where the Fourth Armada had vanished. Our passive sensors had been gathering data from that region for hours, and now I had Dren run a deep spectrum analysis of the area, looking for anything, any trace at all of 1,200 warships. He found it, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was no debris field because there was no debris. What there was, scattered uniformly across a roughly spherical volume of space centered on Earth's orbital zone, was an impossibly fine distribution of individual atoms. Ritharon hull alloy, ceramic composite, trace elements consistent with reactor shielding, weapons arrays, and biological matter. All of it reduced to its component atoms and dispersed evenly through the vacuum, like dust scattered by a careful hand. They were not destroyed in any conventional sense, Dren said, his voice barely above a whisper. They were disassembled, at the molecular level. Every ship, every system, every crew member, broken down into individual atoms and released, simultaneously. I stared at the data. The uniformity of the distribution was what stunned me. If a weapon had destroyed the fleet, there would be concentrations, blast patterns, directional scatter. This was perfectly even. Whatever had done this had not exploded the ships, or torn them apart. It had simply unmade them, dissolved their molecular bonds, and let the constituent atoms drift apart in a gentle, uniform cloud. It was not destruction, it was erasure. Nora, confirm our position relative to the orbital threshold, I said. We are holding at 4 times the threshold distance, well outside it. Good. We stay here. I looked at the holographic globe with its thousands of pulsing nodes, and then at the empty space where 9 million of our people had ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. I think I know what we are looking at, and I think the reason our intelligence classified this world as undefended is because they were looking for orbital platforms and weapons satellites and military garrisons. They were looking for the kinds of defenses they expected to find. And what should they have been looking for? Dren asked. The planet itself, I said. Earth is not an undefended world with some leftover infrastructure. Earth is the weapon. The entire planet is a single, integrated defense system, and the Fourth Armada flew straight into its engagement range, with guns blazing and flags raised. The silence on the bridge of the Quiet Blade lasted a long time. Dren broke it by pulling up a new data stream. He had isolated something from the atomic residue cloud, a fragment so small that it had taken hours for our sensors to identify it. It was a data crystal, or rather, a portion of one. A shard no larger than a grain of sand, the remnant of an automated log recorder from one of the Armada's escort frigates. Its storage medium was dense enough that even the molecular disassembly had not completely erased its contents. There was a fragment of data still readable. He projected it onto our main display, and we watched in silence. The fragment covered 0.3 of a second, less than the blink of an eye. In that tiny window of time, the frigate's sensors had captured a snapshot of what was happening to the fleet. The data showed targeting locks, thousands of them, Over 14,000 independent targeting solutions, each originating from a different point on Earth's surface, each one locked onto a specific ship in the Armada's formation. 14,000 individual weapons platforms, all firing simultaneously, each with a unique energy signature that did not match any weapons technology in the Empire's databases. The engagement had lasted less than 2 seconds. The frigate's fragment ended mid-pulse, its own molecular structure coming apart as the data was being recorded. Its final act, a desperate, automatic attempt to document its own annihilation. I saved the data and sat back in my chair. 14,000 weapons platforms, enough to individually target every ship in the fleet with weapons to spare. Enough to engage a force 10 times the size of the Fourth Armada without reusing a single emitter. And this was just what one damaged data crystal had managed to record in 0.3 of a second. I looked at Earth on our long-range display, that blue and green sphere, with its white clouds and its quiet continents. And for the first time in my career, I felt something close to awe, not for the destruction it had wrought, but for the audacity of its construction. The humans had not left their homeworld undefended. They had turned it into the most powerful weapon in the galaxy and hidden it in plain sight, disguised as an empty monument to a sentimental species. And we had sent 1,200 warships to knock on its door with their guns drawn. I could not sleep. 3 hours after we analyzed the data fragment from the Armada's frigate, I gave up trying to rest and returned to the analysis bay. The holographic globe of Earth still rotated slowly in the center of the room, its thousands of emission points glowing like embers on a dark landscape. I stood there watching it pulse, 11 seconds between each beat, and I forced myself to think clearly despite the dread that had settled into my bones. We needed to understand this system, not just its existence, but its logic, how it thought, what it watched for, what triggered it. Because without that understanding, every warship in the Rithoran Empire was one wrong navigational order away from joining the Fourth Armada as a cloud of scattered atoms. I woke Dren and laid out my plan. The quiet blade would make a slow lateral pass around Earth at extreme range, keeping well outside the orbital threshold, using passive sensors to map the defense network from every possible angle. We would build the most complete picture of this system that our instruments allowed, and we would do it without attracting attention. If we can still avoid attracting attention, Dren said, rubbing fatigue from his eyes. We do not know the system's detection range. We are assuming we are outside it, because we are still alive. Then we proceed carefully and accept the risk, I told him. This is what we came here for. The mapping pass took 14 hours. Nora flew the quiet blade in a wide, slow arc around the Sol system's inner region, always keeping Earth at the same extreme distance, always maintaining passive sensor orientation toward the planet. Dren and I monitored the incoming data in real time, building our picture layer by layer. What emerged was something that would have been beautiful if it had not been so terrifying. The defense grid was not a collection of surface installations or a ring of orbital weapons. It was woven into the fabric of the planet itself. The emitter nodes, those 14,000 points we had detected, were buried deep beneath the surface, some of them kilometers down, integrated into the bedrock and the mantle. They drew power from geothermal systems that tapped directly into Earth's internal heat, and the energy was channeled through a network of superconducting pathways that threaded through the crust like the nervous system of a living creature. The relay station on the Moon was the system's coordination hub, receiving data from every node on the surface and synchronizing their operation. But it was not the only external component. As we completed our arc, Dren identified sensor arrays hidden throughout the inner system, passive detection platforms concealed in asteroid clusters, buried on the surfaces of dead moons, drifting in the orbital paths of the outer planets. They were tiny, nearly invisible, and they were watching everything that entered the Sol system. We flew right through the asteroid belt on our approach, Nora said quietly. Right past them. They detected us, I said. It was not a question. They have known we were here since we entered the system. Then why are we still alive? I had been thinking about this, and I believed I had the answer, but I needed to test it. Because we are not a threat. The Fourth Armada arrived with weapons charged, shields at combat rating, broadcasting declarations of conquest. They presented themselves as hostile. We arrived under stealth, weapons cold, No active emissions, no hostile communications. We presented ourselves as observers. You think the system differentiates between hostile and non-hostile contacts? Dren asked. I think it must. A defense system that destroys everything that enters its range is not a defense system. It is a hazard. The humans would not have built a hazard. They would have built a guardian, something that protects the planet from threats while allowing non-threatening contact. Think about it. This system has been operating autonomously for 400 years. In that time, asteroids have entered the orbital zone, cosmic debris has drifted through, solar wind has battered the sensors. The grid cannot have been firing at every object that crossed its threshold. It must have criteria, rules of engagement. Dren looked skeptical but intrigued. And you want to test this theory? With a drone, not ourselves. I had Nora prepare one of the Quiet Blade's sensor probes, a small, unarmed drone designed for passive reconnaissance. No weapon systems, no active scanners, no communication arrays. Just a simple camera and a recorder, drifting on inertia. We launched it on a trajectory that would carry it across the orbital threshold and into a low orbit above Earth's surface. The three of us stood at the main display and watched the drone's telemetry in silence. It crossed the threshold. Nothing happened. It continued inward, falling into a gentle orbit, its passive camera sending back images of Earth's surface. Overgrown cities, with buildings wrapped in vines and trees growing through cracked pavement, empty highways disappearing under grassland, rivers that had reclaimed their floodplains, spreading into marshes where suburbs had once stood. The planet was being slowly digested by its own ecosystem, nature patiently erasing 4,000 years of civilization, and through it all, hidden beneath the greenery and the silence, the defense grid pulsed with patient, tireless energy. The drone is in orbit and stable, Nora reported. No reaction from the grid. Now activate the drone's active scanner, I said. Low power, standard survey mode. Nora hesitated. Her finger hovered over the command input. Are you sure? That is what the Armada did. They entered with active systems radiating. We need to know if that is what triggered the response. She entered the command. The drone's active scanner powered up, a small radar pulse reaching out to map the terrain below. The response was instantaneous. On our display, a single emitter node on the surface below the drone surged from standby to full power. A beam of energy, thin as a wire, stabbed upward from the surface and intersected the drone's position. The drone's telemetry did not show damage or breakup. It simply stopped. One frame of data existed, and then the next frame did not. The drone had been molecularly disassembled in a fraction of a second, just like the Armada. The energy beam had the same signature we had found in the atomic residue analysis. Identical wavelength, identical power profile, identical result. The emitter node powered back down to standby. The grid returned to its steady 11-second pulse. The entire engagement had lasted less than 2 seconds. There is our answer, I said into the stunned silence. The grid does not attack passive contacts. It attacks active threats. Active sensors, weapons emissions, hostile communications. The drone was harmless until it began actively scanning. The moment it displayed a capability that the grid classified as aggressive, it was eliminated. The Armada came in with everything active, Dren said slowly. Weapons charged, shields radiating, targeting systems sweeping, conquest declarations on every frequency. Every single ship was broadcasting hostile intent. 1,400 active threat signatures, I confirmed, and the grid engaged every single one of them simultaneously, not in sequence, all at once. 14,000 emitters, each one independently targeting a specific ship, all firing in the same instant. The fleet was gone before anyone aboard could have even registered that something was happening. Nora sat down heavily in her pilot's chair. Admiral Torvain was mid-sentence. He was saying there was nothing here. He never even saw it coming. I turned back to the holographic globe and studied the distribution of emitter nodes across Earth's surface. The pattern was not random. It was a carefully designed geometric array, each node positioned to provide overlapping coverage with its neighbors, ensuring that no point in the orbital zone was beyond the reach of multiple emitters simultaneously. The redundancy was staggering. Even if half the nodes failed, the remaining half could still engage and destroy a fleet the size of our entire navy. "I want to understand the power source," I told Dren. "The energy output we are measuring does not make sense for geothermal systems alone, even on a planet this geologically active." He ran the calculations twice before he showed them to me. "You are correct. The geothermal systems provide baseline power for standby operations. But the energy spike during the drone engagement was fed from something deeper. I believe the grid is tapping into the planet's gravitational and rotational energy, possibly through interactions with the core. The magnetic field fluctuations we measured are consistent with a mechanism that converts planetary rotation into directed energy." "How long could it sustain continuous firing at the levels we observed during the Armada's destruction?" Dren looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. "Centuries. The planet's rotational energy is approximately 2.6 times 10 to the 29th joules. Even at the firing rates required to engage the entire Fourth Armada, the grid could sustain continuous operation for hundreds of years before measurably slowing Earth's rotation. The planet was the power source. The planet was the weapon. The planet was the targeting system, the ammunition reserve, and the command center. Everything was integrated into one seamless, self-sustaining, self-defending organism of technology that had been operating without human oversight for 400 years and showed no signs of degradation." Nora asked the question that I knew she had been holding since the drone test. "Who designed this, and why did they leave it behind?" I had been digging through the deepest layers of our intelligence archives, the historical files compiled from intercepted human communications, captured databases, and the accounts of other species who had interacted with humanity over the centuries. The answer I found was incomplete, but it was enough. Before the Great Expansion, before humanity left Earth, they fought wars among themselves that nearly ended their species. Several times, they developed weapons of extraordinary destructive power, and they used them on each other. After the worst of these conflicts, a coalition of their nations initiated a project called the Planetary Defense Initiative. Its stated purpose was to create a last resort protection system for Earth, something that could defend the planet against extinction-level threats regardless of their origin. "Extinction-level threats from within their own species," Dren said. "Initially, yes. The system was designed, built, and tested. One test. Then the entire project was classified at the highest level and never publicly acknowledged again. When the Great Expansion began and humanity started leaving Earth, the system was not decommissioned. It was upgraded, expanded, refined. The humans poured 4 centuries of technological advancement into it before the last of them departed, and then they set it to autonomous operation." "They were afraid," Nora said. "They were afraid of what they might become out there in the galaxy, and they wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, no matter who came back to Earth, whether human or otherwise, the homeworld would be protected." I nodded slowly. "They did not abandon Earth. They consecrated it. They made it sacred and untouchable, and wrapped it in the most powerful weapon ever built. And then they walked away, knowing that whatever the galaxy threw at their cradle world, the cradle world would survive." I ran one final calculation before closing my analysis for the day. I took the grid's estimated engagement capabilities, its firing rate, its power reserves, its targeting resolution, and its simultaneous engagement capacity, and I measured them against the Ratharan Empire's total military strength. Not just the Lost Armada, everything. Every warship, every battle station, every armed transport, every planetary defense platform the Empire possessed across all its territories. The defense grid could destroy all of it, simultaneously, without depleting a measurable fraction of its energy reserves. The humans had not left behind a defense system. They had left behind a sleeping god, and we had been foolish enough to poke it. The morning after my analysis was complete, I began drafting my report to Imperial Command. Every word I wrote felt heavier than the last, because I understood that this report would either save the Empire or be ignored and lead to its destruction. There was no middle ground. The facts were absolute, and they left no room for interpretation or political maneuvering. I was midway through my summary of the grid's capabilities when Dren called me to his station with an urgency that made me abandon my tablet and cross the bridge in 3 strides. "New signal," he said, "originating from the defense grid, but this one is not part of the internal network. It is being transmitted outward." "Direction?" He projected the trajectory onto our star map. The signal was a tight, focused beam, not a broadcast, but a directed communication aimed at a specific point in deep space. I traced its path and felt a new kind of dread settle over me, different from the fear of the grid itself. The signal was aimed at a star system in the Orion Arm, over 400 light-years away, a system that, according to our intelligence files, contained one of humanity's largest colony worlds. "Can you decode it?" I asked. "The encryption is beyond anything in our database. The format does not match any known human communication protocol, but the structure is simple and repetitive. Short burst, pause, short burst, pause. It reads like a status report or an alert notification." "The grid is reporting," I said. "It engaged a hostile fleet, and now it is telling someone what it did." The implications crashed over me like a wave. The defense grid was not just a passive guardian waiting for threats. It was connected to a communication network that reached across the galaxy to human-occupied space. Whatever humanity had become in the 4 centuries since they left Earth, wherever they had scattered, however fragmented their governments and factions might be, they were about to receive a message that their homeworld had been attacked. And the message would tell them who had attacked it. "The conquest declarations," I said, and my own voice sounded distant in my ears. "The Fourth Armada broadcast Protocol 7 declarations on every frequency as they approached. Standard Imperial identification, fleet designation, the name of the Ritharan Empire, our territorial claims. The grid heard all of it before it fired. It knows exactly who sent those ships." Dren was pale, and now it has transmitted that information to human space. I grabbed the edge of his console to steady myself. The military implications were catastrophic, but the strategic implications were worse. Humanity was politically fragmented, yes. No single government, no unified military, no supreme command. Our analysts had viewed this as a weakness. But what happens to a fragmented species when it learns that an alien empire has sent an invasion fleet to its sacred ancestral homeworld? What happens when every human colony, every faction, every nation, every scattered settlement across the galaxy receives the same message at the same time? They unite. That is what happens. The one thing that our analysts were certain humanity could never do, the one vulnerability that our entire strategic doctrine was built upon, evaporates the moment the Ritharan Empire gives them a common enemy and a common cause. And if they could build the defense grid 400 years ago, what had they built since? I was still processing this when Nora interrupted from the pilot station, her voice sharp with alarm. "Priority transmission incoming on Imperial military frequency, coded for this vessel specifically. Put it through." The message was from Imperial Strategic Command, and it was addressed to me by name. I read it twice, because the first time I was certain I had misunderstood. The 9th Battle Group, 600 warships under the command of Admiral Duncan Hale, had been dispatched to the Sol system 40 hours ago. Their mission was to reinforce and recover the Fourth Armada, or failing that, to secure Earth by force and determine the fate of the missing fleet. They were already in transit. Estimated arrival, less than 4 hours. I stood in the center of the bridge with the message glowing on my screen, and for a long moment I could not move. They had sent another fleet. Without waiting for my report, without knowing what had happened, Imperial Command had responded to the loss of 1,200 warships by sending 600 more directly into the same trap. "Nora, open a priority channel to the 9th Battle Group's flagship. Maximum power, tightest beam we can manage. That will break our stealth posture. I do not care. Do it now." She opened the channel, and I began transmitting. I identified myself, cited my mission authorization, and laid out the situation in the clearest terms I could manage. Earth is defended by an automated weapons system of unprecedented power. The Fourth Armada was destroyed, not defeated, not captured, destroyed at the molecular level, by a planetary defense grid that can engage thousands of targets simultaneously. Do not approach with weapons active. Do not broadcast on military frequencies. Do not cross the orbital threshold in any hostile posture. Reduce to passive systems and hold position at the system's edge. I am transmitting full sensor data, including the probe test results and the atomic residue analysis. The response came 20 minutes later, routed through the battle group's communications officer. Admiral Hale's voice was cold and dismissive. Analyst Vorath, your report has been received and reviewed. Your conclusions are not supported by any known weapons technology and are inconsistent with established intelligence regarding the Sol system. The suggestion that a single unoccupied planet could destroy an entire armada is, frankly, absurd. The 9th Battle Group will proceed as ordered, at full combat readiness. We will determine the fate of the 4th Armada through direct investigation, not through the speculative analysis of a single reconnaissance officer suffering from what I suspect is proximity-induced panic. I recommend you withdraw to a safe distance and allow combat personnel to handle this situation. Hale out. I stared at the silent speaker for a full 10 seconds after the transmission ended. Then I transmitted again. I sent the data fragment from the Armada frigate's log crystal, the one showing 14,000 simultaneous targeting locks. I sent the energy calculations, the power source analysis, the drone test footage with its instant silent annihilation. I sent everything I had, organized, annotated, and flagged with the highest urgency markers my authorization allowed. Admiral Hale did not respond. I tried a third time, this time addressing my transmission, not to Hale, but to the battle group's individual ship commanders. I urged any captain who could hear me to review the attached data independently and consider the possibility that their commanding admiral was leading them into the same fate that had befallen the 4th Armada. The response came from Hale's communications officer. Analyst Vorath, you are ordered to cease transmitting on military frequencies. Any further unauthorized communications will be logged as insubordination. This channel is now closed. The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever experienced. Dren put his hand on my shoulder. You tried, Vorath. You showed them the evidence. Evidence they refused to see. Pride, Dren. The same pride that sent the 4th Armada in with banners flying and guns blazing. The Empire cannot conceive of a weapon greater than its own fleets, so it refuses to believe one exists. Nora's instruments chimed softly. Long-range sensors are detecting the 9th Battle Group. They have just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. I moved to the display. 600 warships materialized on our sensor grid in a standard assault formation. Heavy battleships at the core, cruiser screens on the flanks, destroyer wolfpacks in the vanguard. Every ship was radiating active sensor sweeps, weapons at full charge, shields at maximum combat rating. They were broadcasting their identification and intent on every military frequency, exactly as the 4th Armada had done. On the holographic globe, the lunar relay's pulse rate began to increase. 11 seconds between pulses became 8, then 5, then 3. The grid was waking up. Record everything, I told Dren quietly. Every sensor, every frequency, maximum resolution. If we survive this, the Empire will need to see exactly what happens next. Through our long-range display, I watched 600 warships accelerate toward the inner system in perfect formation, their drives blazing, their weapons hot, their admiral convinced that he was leading a rescue mission. And beneath the clouds of a quiet blue planet, 14,000 emitter nodes began their transition from standby to active, each one cycling through its power-up sequence in precise coordination with its neighbors, the entire grid rising from its patient slumber, like something ancient and vast opening its eyes. I watched the 9th Battle Group cross the orbit of the 4th planet, and on my display, Earth's defense grid completed its transition to full active status. Every emitter node on the surface was now at peak output. The lunar relay had abandoned its slow, steady pulse and was cycling continuously, a rapid-fire stream of coordination data, linking thousands of weapons platforms into a single unified targeting solution. Sensor arrays throughout the inner system tracked every ship in the battle group with a precision that our own military technology could not match. Nora had moved the quiet blade to the furthest position our sensors could still maintain resolution. We were watching from the edge of the system, a tiny, cold, silent speck of metal drifting in the darkness. And even at this distance, I could feel the energy building around Earth like pressure before a storm. They are 30 minutes from the orbital threshold at current speed, Nora reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands were white on the console. I opened one final communication channel, not to Admiral Hale, not to the battle group's officers, but a general broadcast on the widest beam I could manage. I spoke slowly and clearly, knowing that this transmission would be recorded by every relay station in range and would eventually reach Imperial Command, regardless of what happened next. This is Senior Analyst Vorath, aboard the reconnaissance vessel Quiet Blade, broadcasting in the clear to all vessels in the Sol system. The 9th Battle Group is approaching an active, autonomous defense system of planetary scale. This system destroyed the 4th Expeditionary Armada, 1,200 warships, in less than 2 seconds. It operates by molecular disassembly and can engage thousands of targets simultaneously. I have transmitted full technical analysis and sensor evidence to Admiral Hale, who has chosen to disregard it. I am now making this broadcast as a matter of record. The following data is attached to this transmission for review by Imperial Command. I included everything: the full sensor logs, the drone test, the residue analysis, the data fragment, the energy calculations. Then I closed the channel and turned back to the display. The battle group was accelerating. Admiral Hale had increased fleet speed, pushing his ships harder toward Earth, as if urgency alone could overcome whatever had taken the 4th Armada. On the military channels, I could hear fragmentary communications between his captains. Some of them had received my data despite Hale's order to disregard it. I caught pieces of conversation: a cruiser captain questioning the formation posture, a destroyer commander requesting permission to reduce active emissions, and Hale's sharp responses shutting down each inquiry with authority and contempt. 20 minutes to threshold, Nora said. I watched the grid's emitter nodes and noticed something I had not seen before. The nodes were not simply powered up and waiting, they were actively tracking. Each one was making minute adjustments to its orientation, subtle shifts in its energy focus that corresponded to the movement of individual ships in the battle group. The grid was not preparing to fire blindly into a formation. It was assigning targets. Each emitter was selecting its specific ship, locking onto its specific energy signature, calculating its specific trajectory. The 14,000 nodes were distributing 600 targets among themselves, with a cold mathematical efficiency that left no ship uncovered and no emitter idle. The targeting assignments are being coordinated through the lunar relay, Dren said, his voice hushed. Each node receives its target designation, confirms acquisition, and reports ready status. It is like watching a firing squad line up. Except this firing squad has 14,000 rifles aimed at 600 targets, I said. Multiple redundant locks on every ship. Even if half the grid malfunctioned, every ship in that formation would still be covered by dozens of independent emitters. 15 minutes. I could see the individual ships now on our high-resolution display. Battleships with hulls 4 kilometers long, their weapons arrays glowing with charged energy. Cruisers with their sleek predatory profiles. Sensor masts sweeping the space ahead. Destroyers darting between the larger vessels, like nervous fish around whales. 600 ships carrying over 4 million crew members, all of them following an admiral who refused to believe that a quiet planet could threaten them. I thought about those 4 million people. I thought about their families waiting in the Empire's core worlds, expecting dispatches and promotion notices and shore leave schedules. I thought about the 9 million who had already been reduced to atomic dust, drifting in Earth's orbital zone. 13 million lives, and for what? For a planet that no one lived on. For a flag planted on a world that was never going to be ours. 10 minutes. I opened a channel one final time. Not to the battle group, not to Imperial Command. I opened it on a narrow beam, aimed at the planet itself, at the defense grid, at whatever automated intelligence was coordinating 14,000 weapons platforms in perfect synchronization. This is Analyst Vorath, of the Rithuran Empire. I am addressing the defense system protecting the planet Earth. The approaching fleet is acting against my recommendations, and against all evidence of your capabilities. I have attempted to warn them. They would not listen. I do not know if you can understand this transmission, or if you are capable of processing it, but I want it on record that not all of us chose this. Not all of us came here to threaten your world. There was no response. I had not expected one. The grid was an automated system, a machine following protocols written by engineers who had been dead for centuries. It did not care about my words or my intentions. It cared about targeting solutions and energy signatures and threat classification algorithms. 5 minutes. I noticed that the grid's energy output had stabilized. The spike of the power-up phase was over, and every system was now at operational capacity, humming with contained power, waiting for the trigger condition to be met. The trigger was simple. I had seen it with the drone. The moment an active threat signature crossed the orbital threshold, the grid would fire. Not a warning shot, not a graduated response. Total, instantaneous, simultaneous elimination of every threat in its engagement envelope. 2 minutes. The Vanguard destroyers will cross the threshold first. I gripped the arms of my chair. Dren had his face pressed to his sensor display, recording everything at maximum resolution. Nora watched her instruments with an expression of terrible calm, the look of a pilot who had already accepted what she was about to witness. 1 minute. The battle group's formation tightened as it approached Earth orbit. Standard assault doctrine, ships closing ranks for mutual shield support and concentrated firepower. They were preparing to fight, to engage whatever enemy had taken the Fourth Armada. They were ready for battle. There would be no battle. Threshold contact. The lead destroyers have entered the engagement zone. I watched it happen. The defense grid activated in a cascade that rippled across Earth's surface like a wave of light sweeping over the globe. From our extreme range, the planet seemed to flicker, a momentary shimmer running across its surface as 14,000 emitter nodes discharged simultaneously. Beams of energy, each one thinner than a hair but carrying more destructive potential than a capital ship's main battery, lanced upward from every continent, from beneath oceans, from under mountain ranges and ice fields. They converged on the orbital zone in a web of light so dense and so brief that our sensors could barely resolve individual beams. The 9th Battle Group existed for exactly 1.3 seconds after the first destroyer crossed the threshold. I watched 600 warships come apart, not in explosions, not in the tearing, rending violence of conventional destruction. They dissolved. Hull plating lost its cohesion and separated into individual molecules. Reactor cores unwound at the atomic level, their contained energies dispersing harmlessly as the containment structures simply ceased to be solid matter. Weapons arrays, sensor masts, bridge towers, crew quarters, all of it became clouds of dissociated atoms expanding gently outward into the vacuum. It was silent. That was the worst part. There was no sound in space, of course, but there should have been something. A flash of light, a burst of radiation, some signature of violence and destruction. Instead, 600 warships faded from existence like fog evaporating in sunlight. One moment they were there, massive and powerful and bristling with weapons. The next moment, they were a thin, uniform haze of atoms drifting in Earth's orbital space, indistinguishable from the remains of the Fourth Armada that had preceded them. 1.3 seconds, 4 million lives, gone. The grid powered back down. The emitter nodes cycled from active to standby, their energy levels dropping in a smooth, controlled descent. The lunar relay resumed its slow, patient pulse, 11 seconds between beats. The system had engaged, neutralized the threat, and returned to its guardian posture with the mechanical indifference of a door closing behind an intruder. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a very long time. I was the one who finally broke the silence, because it was my job, and because if I did not start working immediately, I would have to start thinking about what I had just witnessed, and I was not ready for that yet. Nora, set course for the system's edge. Maximum stealth. Weapons remain cold. All active systems remain offline. Dren, compile every piece of data we have gathered into a single encrypted package for transmission to Imperial Command. What are your recommendations going to say? Dren asked. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been screaming, though he had not made a sound. I sat at my station and began writing. My hands were steady, even though the rest of me was not. My recommendations will say that Earth is permanently, irrevocably, beyond the Empire's ability to claim, control, or threaten. The defense grid is powered by the planet's own gravitational and geothermal energy, giving it a functionally infinite operational lifespan. It can engage and destroy the Empire's entire combined military simultaneously, without expending a significant fraction of its reserves. Any vessel that enters Earth's orbital space with active weapons, active sensors, or hostile communications will be destroyed instantly, regardless of its size, speed, shielding, or numbers. I paused and added a section that I knew would be the most difficult for Imperial Command to accept. I will further recommend that the Empire make no attempt whatsoever to develop countermeasures, deploy long-range weapons against the planet, or engage the defense grid in any capacity. The system has already transmitted a report of both engagements to human-occupied space. The humans now know that the Ritharan Empire sent invasion fleets to their homeworld. Whatever diplomatic consequences follow from this knowledge will be severe. Tempting further military action against Earth will only confirm humanity's worst assumptions about our intentions and accelerate whatever response they are already planning. "You think they will respond?" Nora asked. I looked at her and saw the same question I had been asking myself. 14 million of our people have been killed by their defense grid. In our culture, that would demand retaliation. But in their culture, their homeworld was attacked by an alien empire, and their ancient guardian destroyed the invaders without the loss of a single human life. They may view this as a vindication of their ancestors' foresight, or they may view it as an act of aggression that requires an answer. I pulled up the energy calculations one final time and added my last recommendation to the report. The defense grid we have observed represents technology that is at minimum 400 years old. It was built before the Great Expansion, before humanity scattered across the galaxy, before they had access to the resources and knowledge they have acquired since. If this is what they could build with the technology of 4 centuries ago, the Empire should consider very carefully what they are capable of building now. Any confrontation with humanity must account for the possibility that their current military capabilities are as far beyond this defense grid as this defense grid is beyond anything we possess. I transmitted the report, every byte of data, every frame of sensor footage, every calculation and analysis, on the tightest, most heavily encrypted beam the Quiet Blade could generate, aimed directly at the nearest Imperial relay station. Then I sat back and watched Earth recede on our aft display as Nora guided us toward the system's edge and the safety of faster-than-light travel. The planet hung in the darkness, blue and green and white, serene and impossibly beautiful. Clouds drifted across its face, oceans caught the light of its yellow sun and scattered it in patterns that no artist could have designed. From this distance, it looked like paradise, a garden world, lush and alive and waiting. And beneath its skin, woven into the stone and the iron and the spinning liquid core, 14,000 weapons platforms rested in patient silence, their targeting systems clear, their power reserves full, their automated minds watching the stars with tireless, eternal vigilance. I thought about the humans who had built this, not the engineers and physicists who had designed the emitters and coded the targeting algorithms. I thought about the ones who had made the decision, the leaders who had looked at their broken, beautiful, irreplaceable homeworld and decided that it would never be taken, that it would never burn, that no matter how far they wandered, no matter how many centuries passed, no matter what empires rose and fell across the galaxy, this one blue world would remain, sacred, protected, forever. They had not trusted themselves with it. That was the part that stuck with me. They had not left a garrison or a fleet or a government in charge of Earth's defense. They had known their own species too well for that. Humans could be corrupted, could be divided, could turn on each other and destroy the very things they loved. So they had taken themselves out of the equation. They had built something that did not need them, something that would not falter or betray or forget. And they had given it a single, simple directive: protect this world, and do not stop, and do not sleep, and do not fail. And it had not failed. I filed my final log entry as the Quiet Blade's faster-than-light drive began its spin-up sequence. Most of it was technical, dry language for the record, but at the end, I added a personal note, something that would not appear in the official report, something I needed to say even if no one else ever read it. In my career, I have studied the military capabilities of 37 spacefaring species. I have analyzed their weapons, their strategies, their strengths and their weaknesses. I have provided assessments that have guided the Empire's expansion for over 2 decades, and I have never once felt that any civilization I examined was beyond our ability to understand, to match, or to overcome. I was wrong. Not because the defense grid is powerful, though it is, beyond anything I could have imagined. I was wrong because I failed to understand what it represents. It is not a weapon, it is a promise. A promise made by a species to its own cradle, to the soil and seas and skies that gave them life. A promise that transcends politics and governments and the rise and fall of empires. The humans built this because they loved something enough to protect it forever, and they had the ability to make forever mean exactly what it says. Every species I have studied protects what it values, with armies and fleets, with soldiers and commanders, with mortal beings who age and tire and eventually fail. The humans chose differently. They built their love into the bones of the earth and set it to stand watch until the stars go dark, and in doing so, they achieved something that no empire in the galaxy, including our own, will ever be able to claim. They made something eternal. The stars stretched into lines of light as the drive engaged, and the Sol system vanished behind us. I closed my log, dimmed my station, and sat in the quiet hum of the Quiet Blade's engines, carrying 1,800 years of military pride back to an empire that was about to learn what the word humility meant. Behind us, Earth turned in silence, wrapped in clouds and patience, guarding itself with the quiet, absolute certainty of something that had all the time in the universe and intended to use every second of it.